I had learned to stop thinking of them as invincible the moment I saw one of their envoys hesitate at a customs checkpoint. The aliens' arrogance had carried it through continents, treaties, and boardrooms, but a single bureaucrat with a stack of forms and a pen had reduced it to a trembling shadow of its former menace. That was the moment I realized our battlefield wasn't the sky, it was the paper trail, the labyrinth of human systems they couldn't decipher. We had seeded traps in the most mundane places: zoning laws, tax codes, patent filings. They thought they were infiltrating our governments, but every step deeper pulled them into a swamp of contradictions and loopholes. I watched one of their operatives spend weeks trying to register a shell company, only to be undone by a missing stamp on a notarized document. They didn't understand that the true machinery of Earth wasn't powered by weapons, it was powered by signatures, deadlines, and the quiet tyranny of procedure. My role was to make sure they never saw the pattern. I posed as a consultant, guiding them through the maze while subtly tightening the noose. Every time they thought they had secured influence, I redirected them into committees designed to stall, hearings that never ended, audits that multiplied like Hydra heads. They grew frustrated, desperate, and in their desperation they revealed themselves. The more they struggled, the more they exposed their networks, their strategies, their vulnerabilities. I remember the night one of them confronted me, demanding to know why progress was so slow. I leaned back, smiled, and asked if they had filed Form 27B6 with the Department of Historical Preservation. The silence that followed was sweeter than any victory I could have imagined. They had no idea such a form even existed, and yet without it their entire plan collapsed. That was the beauty of our trap. It wasn't built on force but on the weight of centuries of human bureaucracy sharpened into a weapon they could never hope to wield. And as they faltered, humanity grew stronger. We didn't need to fire a shot. We just needed to keep the ink flowing, the files piling, the laws twisting. They had come seeking our darkest secrets, but what they found was something far worse. A civilization that had turned its own chaos into the most silent, unstoppable trap in history. The envoy's mandibles twitched as it processed my words. Form 27B6, it repeated, the human syllables clumsy in its throat. You mentioned this before. It does not appear in any of our data archives. Of course it doesn't, I said, tapping the table. It was filed in 1923, lost in a fire in 1947, and only rediscovered last year by an intern who didn't know what she had. The original is handwritten on paper that crumbles if you breathe on it. We digitized it naturally, but the digital copy lacks the original seal. And without that seal, the form is just a suggestion. Then why does it matter? Because the Department of Historical Preservation operates on precedent, not logic. If you don't have the form, you don't have standing. And without standing, your entire claim to the artifact you're after, the one buried beneath the old library in Alexandria, is null. You can't even apply for the permit to dig. The envoy's skin shifted color, a sign of agitation I had learned to read. We have lawyers, we have diplomats, you have nothing, I said, if you can't prove you exist on paper. The moment you filed your first incorporation documents, you became a legal entity. Congratulations. But that means you're now subject to every law, every regulation, every obscure ordinance we've written for the last 2,000 years. You wanted to understand humanity. This is what we are. We are the weight of every mistake, every loophole, every forgotten clause, all pressing down on you at once. The envoy stood, its frame vibrating. We will find another way. You can't, I said. I made sure of it. Every path you take leads to a dead end that requires a signature from someone who doesn't exist. Every door you open reveals a committee that hasn't met since 1974. The trap isn't just silent, it's infinite. It left without another word. I watched it go, knowing it would spend the next 3 months trying to locate a man named John Doe who was listed as the sole signatory for the form's validation. John Doe, of course, was a placeholder, but the law didn't know that. And until the envoy could prove otherwise, it was stuck. The heavy blast door clicked shut behind the envoy, its faint, chittering mandible clicks fading down the linoleum hallway. I leaned back in my creaking office chair, the plastic frame digging into my spine, and poured the last of the cold, bitter office coffee into a mug chipped at the rim from when I dropped it the day the first envoy landed 3 years prior. The intercom on my desk crackled before I could take a sip. "They're moving," said Mara's voice tinny through the speaker. She ran the surveillance feed from the consulate's legal wing, a former contract lawyer who joined the counter-alien task force after she realized the aliens were worse at paperwork than her old divorced clients. "Your John Doe stunt worked better than we thought. They've already pulled 3 senior archivists out of a research trip to Kyoto to trace his lineage." I snickered, taking a slow sip of the stale coffee. "Tell them to enjoy the wild goose chase." John Doe was a placeholder we started using in 1897 for unclaimed property claims. We've got 17,000 different John Does on file across 42 state archives alone, each with their own conflicting notarization dates and witness signatures. They'll be chasing ghosts until the heat death of the universe if we let them. Oh, we're not letting them stop at John Doe, Mara said, and I heard the grin in her voice. Remember that lost archive we fed them last quarter, the one with the records of pre-human settlements in the Gobi Desert that supposedly held coordinates to a hidden alien ship? We just rediscovered a copy this morning. Only problem is, access to it requires a valid permit from the Bureau of Undersea Land Claims, which has been defunct since 1982. The only surviving signatory on the permit application form is a guy named Earl who retired to Boca Raton and hasn't touched a regulatory form in 30 years. We already sent a courier to drop off the request. Earl's gonna charge them a $500 processing fee just to read the cover page, and he's gonna make them fill out a form asking for their favorite color before he even looks at it. I laughed, leaning forward to pull up the encrypted feed from the consulate's common room. Sure enough, 3 of the alien envoys were huddled around a holopad, their chitinous skin shifting between angry crimson and confused slate gray as they tried to parse the latest batch of forms we'd slipped them during a routine, cultural exchange last month. They'd come to Earth seeking our darkest secrets, they'd boasted when their ships first appeared in our skies, proof of ancient extraterrestrial contact, hidden prototype weapons caches, the lost quantum technology that would let them conquer the galaxy. They thought our history was a treasure trove of hidden power, something they could snatch up and use against us before we even knew what hit us. What they didn't understand was that our history wasn't a treasure trove, it was a minefield. We'd spent 200,000 years making sure every step they took was bogged down in red tape, every lead they followed led to a locked door with a key held by a dead man, every secret they uncovered came with a 400-page terms of service agreement they had to sign in triplicate before they could even look at it. We didn't need laser cannons or plasma torpedoes. We had the IRS. We had the Department of Motor Vehicles. We had the obscure 1872 territorial law that required all extraterrestrial entities seeking to excavate cultural artifacts to submit a notarized affidavit from a local cemetery sexton, confirming no unmarked indigenous graves were within a 10-mile radius of the dig site. The sexton for the Alexandria plot had died in 1998. His replacement didn't know how to notarize an affidavit for a non-human entity. The one after that refused to on principle, after we slipped him a $1,000 gift card to the local hardware store. The intercom crackled again, this time with a different lower-frequency tone, the signal for the deep cover asset embedded in the alien high command, codename Scribe. We deplanted Scribe 22 years prior, before the aliens even made contact, a young xenosociologist who'd been converted after we faked a leak of classified alien tech schematics that were just nonsense equations scribbled on the back of a pizza receipt. They're escalating, Scribe's quiet, distorted voice said. I'd never met Scribe in person. No one in the task force had. They're talking about sending a ground team to dig the Alexandria site anyway, bypass all permits. They think if they move fast enough, they can get to the artifact before we can stop them. I glanced at the file on my desk labeled Alexandria site zoning and smiled. Let them try. We got the local zoning board to reclassify the entire plot as a protected migratory bird wetland last week. They'd need a permit from the EPA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the local Historical Society just to bring a shovel onto the property. The Historical Society hasn't met since 2019 because their treasurer embezzled the membership funds and no one in town wants to run for the unpaid position. We're processing their membership applications as we speak. Each one requires 2 notarized reference letters from existing members. There are 4 existing members. 2 are in prison for fraud, 1 is in a nursing home with advanced dementia, and the 4th is me. I'm not writing any letters. Scribe chuckled, the sound warping through the static. They're also asking about the Rosetta Stone backup we told them was stored in a private vault in Switzerland. We told them it's classified level 7, access only to personnel with top secret clearance and a notarized birth certificate from a Swiss canton that hasn't existed since 1798. Perfect, I said, reaching for the stack of forms on my desk. We'll make them apply for Swiss citizenship first. That takes 10 years minimum and requires them to pass a French language exam. Their translator barely speaks English, let alone Swiss German. By the time they get through the application process, they'll have forgotten what they were even looking for. I hung up the intercom and glanced at the photo taped to the edge of my monitor, the faded Polaroid of my grandma, who'd worked in the War Department's paperwork division during World War II. She'd always said the most powerful weapon humanity ever built wasn't the atomic bomb. It was a form that no one could fill out correctly. The aliens thought they were the masters of the galaxy, that their advanced technology and superior physical strength would let them walk all over us. They didn't know that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't anything we'd built. It was the mess we'd built, the thousands of years of laws and rules and loopholes we'd stacked up like bricks, waiting for someone stupid enough to try to move them. The intercom buzzed again, Mara's tone giddy this time. Heads up, they just filed a formal complaint with the UN saying we're obstructing their inalienable right to cultural heritage exploration. I grinned, reaching for my pen and flipping open the top form on my desk. Great. Tell the UN legal team to send them Form 12C9, Request for Review of Obstruction Complaint. It requires a $10,000 non-refundable filing fee, 3 witness statements from people who have never heard of the United Nations, and a notarized copy of their home planet's constitution, translated into English by a certified translator who is a member of the American Translators Association and has passed their ethics exam with a score of 90% or higher. Oh, and the ATA has a 12-month backlog for new certification exams right now. We already reserved all the slots for our guys. I heard Mara cackle through the speaker. You're evil. I'm a bureaucrat, I said, signing my name at the bottom of the form with a flourish. There's a difference. Now send the form. And make sure it's in triplicate. They hate triplicate. Mara's laughter still echoed in my ears when the first alien delegation stormed into the lobby, their shimmering robes dragging across the marble floor like spilled oil. They demanded immediate arbitration, waving their complaint papers as if they were weapons. I didn't flinch. Instead, I slid a fresh stack of forms across the counter, each one thicker than the last, each one requiring signatures from departments that hadn't existed since the Ottoman Empire. Watching their faces twist in confusion was better than any battlefield victory. They had no idea they'd walked into the labyrinth we'd spent centuries perfecting. I leaned back in my chair, remembering the old stories my grandmother used to tell me about how the War Department once buried enemy spies under mountains of requisition slips and ration cards until they begged for mercy. We weren't fighting with guns now, but the principle was the same. Every alien demand was met with a form, every form with a requirement, every requirement with a contradiction buried in fine print. They thought they were clever, but clever doesn't survive against bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is patient. Bureaucracy is eternal. Later that night, I received a confidential memo from the Department of Cultural Preservation. The aliens had tried to bypass us by hiring a private law firm in New York. The firm had already billed them millions just to explain the difference between heritage exploration and archival excavation. I almost felt sorry for them, almost. They didn't realize that every lawyer in Manhattan had been briefed months ago, trained to spin them in circles until they collapsed under the weight of precedent and procedure. We didn't need weapons, we had case law. The next morning, Mara dropped another file on my desk. They're requesting expedited review, she said, barely containing her grin. Apparently they think they can pay extra to skip the line. I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. Tell them expedited review requires a waiver signed by the Secretary of Obsolete Languages. The office closed in 1963, but technically it still exists on paper. They'll need to prove the secretary is alive or at least legally resurrected before we can process the request. Mara's eyes sparkled. You're going to break them. No, I said, sliding the file into the growing tower beside me. I'm going to let them break themselves. That's the beauty of it. We don't have to lift a finger. The trap is already sprung. They walked into it the moment they asked for permission. The alien envoy's eyes narrowed as I handed them the latest form, a triplicate request for a temporary cultural liaison permit that required endorsements from 3 ministries that had been dissolved during the Great Reclamation of 41. I watched the lead delegate's fingers tremble over the paper, the ink of their bioluminescent script smudging where sweat met parchment. They had come expecting a swift exchange of technology for access to our archives. Instead, they found themselves entangled in a web spun from centuries of legislative archaeology. Mara slipped a thin dossier across my desk while I pretended to study the alien's vexed expression. Inside lay a memo from the Office of Historical Anomalies, flagged eyes only. It detailed how the delegation's own homeworld had, a millennium ago, collapsed under the weight of an overzealous regulatory code that demanded permits for every breath taken outside designated habitat zones. The irony was not lost on me. We were merely reflecting back a mirror they had forged for themselves. They're trying to invoke the Interstellar Accord of 23, Mara whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air filtration system. They claim it grants them unrestricted access to any site deemed of universal significance. I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. The accord does exist, but it's been superseded by the Domestic Antiquities Protection Act of 57, which in turn was amended by the Executive Order on Preservation of Sacred Sites, issued by a president who resigned before the ink dried. To invoke the accord, they'd need a certification from the Secretary of Temporal Affairs, a position abolished when the last timekeeper retired in 09. The paperwork to resurrect that office alone would take a committee of historians 3 lifetimes to compile. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that made the alien's antennae twitch. You're enjoying this. I'm not enjoying it, I corrected, sliding the dossier back into the growing tower of files beside me. I'm observing. Every form they fill, every contradiction they stumble over chips away at their certainty. They came here believing their superiority lay in technology, in the ability to bend matter to their will. They forgot that the most potent weapon a civilization can wield is the ability to make its adversaries doubt the very ground they stand on. Later, after the delegation had retreated to their temporary quarters, a suite of rooms we had generously offered, complete with view of the capital's marble facade, I received a secure ping from my old contact in the Department of Cultural Liaison. A burst of encrypted text flickered across my retinal display. They've hired a linguist. Trying to argue that heritage exploration is a protected cultural right under the Geneva Conventions of Space. I forwarded the message to Mara with a single line attached: let them have their linguist. We'll give them a dictionary written in dead dialects. The next day, the alien's linguist, a tall, slender being with skin that shifted colors like oil on water, arrived with a stack of glossy brochures and a portable translator humming softly in his chest pocket. He sat across from me, his posture impeccable, his tone diplomatic. We seek only to understand, he began, to preserve the shared heritage of all sentient species. I nodded, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. Understanding is a noble pursuit. To begin, please complete Form 7B Omega, Application for Cross-Species Cultural Exchange. It requires a sworn affidavit from a certified historian specializing in pre-collapse Terran mythology, a notarized copy of your homeworld's environmental impact assessment, and a signed waiver acknowledging that any findings may be subject to the Secrecy Act of 32, which classifies all knowledge of terrestrial anomalies above level 5 as classified indefinitely. His color shifted to a dull gray, the hue of confusion. We have none of those, he said, voice flat. Our scholars work in real time, we do not archive. I leaned forward, letting the silence stretch. Then perhaps you should consider why we archive, not because we fear loss, but because we understand that memory is the only thing that outlives empires. Your species travels the stars, yet you carry no record of where you've been. That makes you transient. And transients, as you'll find, are subject to the same scrutiny as any visitor who overstays their welcome. He opened his mouth to protest, but a soft chime from his translator interrupted, a notification that his request for expedited review had been logged, queued behind 15 other pending applications, each marked with a red flag indicating missing documentation. I watched his shoulders slump ever so slightly, the first crack in his composure. Mara appeared at the doorway, holding a steaming cup of something that smelled like burnt caramel and ozone. They're filing a complaint with the Intergalactic Tribunal, she said, eyes gleaming, claiming we're obstructing their peaceful mission. I took the cup, feeling its warmth seep into my palms. Let them file. The tribunal's docket is backed up by cases dating back to the early Confederation era. Their complaint will be assigned to a subcommittee that meets once every 7 years, pending the availability of a quorum of 3 species that haven't been extinct for at least 2 centuries. By the time they get a hearing, we'll have already archived everything they wanted to see under the guise of preservation for future study. She laughed again, low and genuine. You're turning their own curiosity into a cage. I sipped the drink, the bittersweetness reminding me of old Earth's coffee, a beverage long replaced by synthetic nutriment but still retained in the archives for its cultural resonance. No, I replied, feeling the words settle like dust on a forgotten shelf. I'm giving them all the rope they need to hang themselves with their own ambition. And when they finally realize the trap isn't made of steel or plasma but of ink, stamps, and signatures they can't fulfill, they'll understand why we never needed to fire a shot. Outside, the alien delegation's ship hung in the sky, a silent silhouette against the dawn, its hull catching the first light like a promise. Inside, the forms multiplied, the contradictions deepened, and the trap, woven not from force but from the patient, relentless thread of human bureaucracy, clicked shut, one reluctant signature at a time. We need to continue the story from the first-person perspective. The previous part ended with the trap of bureaucracy clicking shut. The next part should advance the plot. The aliens realize they race stuck, maybe try to bypass or escalate, but humanity counters with deeper layers of procedure. Maintain the tone of psychological warfare and bureaucratic cunning. No headings, no markdown, start immediately. The translator chimed again, this time with a priority override. The alien's eyes flickered, a brief, unsettling vertical slit replacing the placid brown. Your intergalactic tribunal has been informed of our grievance. They have assigned an emergency liaison. I set down the cup. And who might that be? Ambassador Vex of the Syndicate of Allied Polities. He straightened, a hint of triumph bleeding through his carefully modulated voice. We have precedent, they will compel your compliance within 3 cycles. I nodded slowly, letting him savor the moment. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a worn data chip no larger than a fingernail. Ambassador Vex, I repeated, rolling the name like a stone. I remember him. He was once a procurement officer for the 3rd Meridian Fleet, embezzled 70 million credits in ghost shipments before a routine audit caught him. The syndicate buried it to avoid scandal. But we archive everything. I slid the chip across the table. He didn't touch it. That file contains the complete transaction logs, the forged signatures, and the encrypted correspondence with his offshore accounts. It also includes the exact timeline of his cover-up, cross-referenced with the death of a junior auditor who asked too many questions. I let the silence hang. You can deliver it to him yourself, or I can forward it to the syndicate's Internal Affairs Division. Your choice. His breathing changed, a subtle hitch that would have been invisible to anyone not trained to read the micro-expressions of a species that believed it had none. You would blackmail a tribunal liaison. Blackmail implies a demand. I'm simply offering you a courtesy. You see, Ambassador Vex has a very personal stake in ensuring that certain records remain unexamined. If he's forced to rule against us, he'll know that I know. And he'll also know that the moment he rules against us, that file becomes public. I picked up my cup again, the warmth now a comfort. So here's the new timeline. You will withdraw your complaint. You will resubmit your request for access using the proper channels, which, as you'll discover, require a cultural impact assessment, a biohazard clearance, and a third-party endorsement from a species that hasn't yet achieved FTL travel. That endorsement can only be obtained by traveling to their homeworld, which is, by happy coincidence, located in a nebula that disrupts faster-than-light communications. The round trip will take approximately 400 years. He stared at the chip, then at me, then at the endless forms still piling up on Mara's desk. You've done this before. We've been doing this since before your species discovered fire. The only difference is, now we have better paper. His carapace flushes pale indigo along the ridges of his thorax, the Zalari tell for suppressed fury I'd memorized 3 weeks prior when his preliminary contact report crossed my desk. He doesn't reach for the chip. His clawed fingers flex once, twice, like he's weighing the cost of hurling the table across the room against walking out with his career intact. You think this ends here, he says, voice tight, the translator strapped to his throat warping his guttural tones into flat, uninflected standard. The syndicate will send another envoy. They won't be as accommodating as I am. I slide a second data chip across the table, this one etched with the glowing blue seal of the syndicate's Internal Affairs Bureau. That one's for Ambassador Vex, same embezzlement logs plus the full transaction records for every bribe he's accepted from the Helix mining cartels over the last 12 years, including the payment for the cover-up of that colony ship that exploded in the Gamma Draconis system last month. If the next envoy so much as requests a landing permit without a signed copy of the Mutual Non-Interference Pact in hand, I'll leak both to every interstellar news outlet within 100 light-years before his shuttle clears low orbit. Your syndicate prides itself on spotless public image, don't they? Imagine the fallout when every member polity sees their top liaison taking bribes to hide the murder of 3,000 colonists. Mara doesn't look up from the tablet she's been tapping this whole time, just shoves a stack of papers across the table so hard the corner clips the edge of the first chip. The pages are an inch thick, every clause of the pact printed in 6 different galactic scripts, the margins crammed with the addendums we'd spent 6 months drafting specifically for this meeting. I tacked on the mandatory planetary heritage review clause, she says, not pausing her typing. Took me 40 hours to draft the exemption forms they'll need to fill out if they ever want to send a trade delegation here without triggering a full biohazard quarantine. Also added the requirement that any future contact requests include a full accounting of their species, entire historical record, no redactions. We found out last year the Zalari covered up a genocide of a pre-industrial species on their 3rd colony world. Turns out that's a disqualifier under the new Cultural Heritage Guidelines we slipped into the Galactic Concordat's bylaws last cycle. Funny how that works. Subliaison Kale's mandibles click so fast they blur, a sound I knew meant he was running through every possible countermove in his head and coming up empty. He picks up the pen I set down next to the pact, his claw trembling just enough to leave a smudge on the signature line, and scrawls his designation at the bottom of the last page. He shoves the signed copy at me so hard it skitters across the table, then snatches both data chips off the surface, tucking them into the pouch at his belt like they're poisoned. This isn't over, he spits, already heading for the door. You've bought yourselves a delay, nothing more. The galaxy doesn't forget and it doesn't forgive. I pick up the signed pact, holding it up to the fluorescent light to check that the ink had taken properly. Good. That gives us exactly 73 years, by our calculations, before the syndicate comes back begging for lithium trade rights when their own reserves run dry. We'll have the orbital defense grid fully operational by then, and we'll have rewritten the pact 3 more times just for fun. I take a sip of my coffee, which has gone cold, and nod at the door he just slammed shut. Tell Vex we'll be in touch if we need anything else. Oh, and if he tries to scrub the junior auditor's death from his records, we have a copy of the autopsy report too, just in case. Mara snorts, finally looking up from her tablet and tosses me a fresh data chip. That's the file on the Zalari pre-industrial genocide I mentioned. Figured we'd hold on to it for the next round of negotiations. They'll be back in 20 tops. Their helium-3 reserves are garbage, and they know we have the largest stockpile in the quadrant. I slot the chip into my pocket, next to the worn one I'd pulled out 10 minutes prior, and lean back in my chair. Outside the window, the first of the alien shuttle's thrusters flare bright orange as it lifts off from the landing pad, and I can't help but smile. They'd come here expecting to find a primitive species squabbling over borders and resources, ready to be carved up for the taking. They didn't know that every dark secret we'd ever buried, every war crime from the expansion era, every corrupt politician we'd silenced to keep the fragile peace, every cover-up we'd spun to keep the rest of the galaxy from seeing how fractured we'd been for 200 years, we'd turned all of it into a weapon. They thought they were luring us into a trap, when really we'd been waiting for them to walk into ours for half a century. Mara taps her screen again and a new form pops up on my desk, the header reading, Request for Formal Diplomatic Contact Species 7892, the Vera Collective. She smirks. Next one's in an hour. They're here to complain about our deep-sea mining operations. Said we're disturbing their sacred coral beds. I rub my eyes and reach for the pen. Let's see, what's their worst secret? Pull up their file. Mara's fingers fly across the keys and a list of infractions pops up on her screen. Embezzlement of humanitarian aid, illegal slave trading, cover-up of a planetary bioweapon accident. She grins. Oh, they're going to love the cultural impact assessment we drafted for them. Requires them to submit the full genetic records of every single Vera citizen, plus a full accounting of their slave trade profits, to prove they don't have any lingering bioweapon strains in their gene pool. Processing time is 127 years. Minimum. I pick up the pen and sign my name at the bottom of the blank form before they even walk in the door. Perfect, let them wait. The Vera delegation arrives precisely on schedule, their robes dripping with ceremonial algae that leaves a faint trail across the polished floor. I don't bother standing. They expect reverence, but what they'll get is paperwork. Mara slides the signed form across the desk, and I watch their leader's gills flare as he reads the first clause. It's always the same shock, indignation, then the slow realization that we've already mapped every skeleton in their closet. They can't argue without exposing themselves further, and they know it. I sip the cold coffee again, savoring the bitterness. You'll find the compliance requirements straightforward, I say, keeping my tone flat. Submit the records, wait for processing, and in the meantime refrain from interfering with our mining operations. Failure to comply will result in a suspension of trade privileges across 3 sectors. The Vera leader sputters, his attendants shifting nervously. Mara doesn't look up, just flicks another file onto the desk, this one marked with a red seal. Inside is the evidence of their slave trade profits, cross-referenced with the humanitarian aid they embezzled. We don't even need to threaten them. The implication is enough. One leak to the Galactic Tribunal and their entire collective collapses under sanctions. They leave without another word, robes dragging, algae drying into brittle flakes. Mara finally exhales, leaning back. 2 down, who's next? I glance at the schedule. The Zalari envoy, they'll want to renegotiate the helium-3 deal, Mara smirks, and we'll remind them of the genocide they buried, offer them a choice, pay triple the rate, or we file the report with the tribunal. I nod, already picturing their faces when they realize we've cataloged every atrocity they thought erased. It isn't about the resources, not really, it's about control. Every alien species that sets foot on Earth walks into a labyrinth of bureaucracy so dense, so suffocating that they can't move without triggering a trap we've laid decades in advance. They came here thinking they'd conquer us with ships and weapons. Instead, they're drowning in forms, audits, and tribunals, each one sharpened into a blade by our own history. I lean back, watching the shuttle bay fill with the next delegation. Humanity doesn't need fleets or armies. We have something far more dangerous, the truth, weaponized and waiting. And as long as they keep coming, we'll keep turning their secrets against them, one signature at a time. The Zalari envoy glides in on a cushion of ionized mist, their translucent skin pulsing with a soft bioluminescence that shifts colors according to their mood. I can see the faint tremor in their appendages as they sense the weight of the room, dozens of files stacked like fortifications, the hum of the air recyclers, the quiet insistence of human eyes that have seen too much. Mara stands beside me, her posture relaxed but her gaze sharp, already scanning for the micro-expressions that betray a lie. Their ambassador, a tall figure with ridges along its forearms that glow a wary amber, bows low enough that the tips of its tendrils brush the polished floor. We come in peace, it intones, its voice resonant, layered with harmonics that would make a human choir shudder. We seek to amend the helium-3 accord. Our extraction yields have fallen below projections and we require additional quotas to sustain our fleet's long-range missions. I let the silence stretch, feeling the mist condense into tiny droplets on the edge of the desk. Mara slides a thin dossier toward them, its cover stamped with the sigil of the Earth Legal Compliance Division, a stylized scales balanced over a cracked planet. Your request is noted, I say, voice even. Before we can discuss any adjustments, we must verify compliance with the existing treaty's annexes. Specifically Article 7, Subsection 4, which governs environmental impact assessments for off-world mining operations. The Zolari's bioluminescence flickers to a deeper violet, a sign of irritation I've learned to read. We have submitted all required documentation, the ambassador replies, a hint of static creeping into its tone. Our impact studies were filed 3 cycles ago. Mara opens the dossier, revealing a series of annotated satellite images, spectral analyses, and, most damning, a time-stamped log of helium-3 extraction rates cross-referenced with atmospheric particulate spikes recorded by our global monitoring grid. These figures, she says, tapping a line where the Zolari's reported output diverges sharply from our own readings, indicate a variance of 23% over the last 6 months. Under the treaty, such discrepancies trigger an automatic audit, and pending audit results, any renegotiation is suspended. The ambassador's tendrils tight, the amber glow flaring. You accuse us of falsifying data. It's not an accusation, it's a statement of fact wrapped in diplomatic silk. I lean forward, letting the coffee's bitterness linger on my tongue. We don't accuse, we confirm. Our autonomous audit drones have been sampling your extraction sites since the treaty's ratification. The data is immutable, stored in a quantum-locked ledger accessible to all signatories. If you wish to contest the findings, you may request an independent review, but that review will be conducted by the tribunal's panel, which includes representatives from species you have historically exploited. A ripple passes through the envoy's mist, the bioluminescence stutters, shifting to a wary green. They know what I'm referencing, the buried genocide of the Lyrathans, a atrocity the Zolari thought erased when they scrubbed the records from their own archives. What they don't know is that we never needed their confession. We harvested the fragments from intercepted communications, from the black market data brokers who dealt in stolen xenohistory, and from the very algae that clings to their ceremonial robes, a biomarker that binds to the DNA of those who participated in the purge. Mara slides another file across the desk, this one sealed with a crimson wax that bears the emblem of the Human Rights Directorate. Inside lies a condensed dossier, testimonies from surviving Lyrathan refugees, satellite imagery of mass graves hidden beneath ice fields on Zolari colony worlds, and financial trails showing how the profits from those atrocities were funneled into the very helium-3 ventures they now seek to expand. The ambassador's glow dims to a near black, the mist around it thickening as if absorbing the weight of revelation. We were unaware, it whispers, the harmonics fraying. Our archives were compromised. I let the truth hang, not pressing further. Instead, I reach for the standard compliance form, a simple sheet requesting a voluntary disclosure of any past violations in exchange for reduced penalties under the treaty's reconciliation clause. Sign this, I say, and we can proceed to discuss quotas. Refuse, and the tribunal will convene a full investigation. The sanctions that follow will not merely suspend trade, they will freeze your off-world assets, restrict your fleet's movement through our solar corridors, and open the door for reparations claims from every species you have harmed. The envoy hesitates, the mist swirling in the way they had no answer. The form. With a slows, then, with a motion that speaks of resignation rather than defeat, one of its tendrils lifts the pen. The nib touches the paper, leaving a trail of luminescent ink that fades as it dries, an oddly beautiful metaphor for the impermanence of deceit when faced with an immutable record. As they sign, Mara leans in, her voice barely above a whisper. Remember, the forms are only the beginning. The real trap is the patience we've cultivated. You'll find that every time you try to move, another clause, another audit, another layer of oversight waits. We've been waiting for you since the first human walked these shores. The envoy departs, its mist thinning, the bioluminescence now a subdued, contemplative blue. I watch the shuttle bay doors seal behind them, the hum of the recyclers filling the void left by their presence. Mara turns to me, a faint smile playing on her lips. 3 down, who's next? I glance at the schedule, the names scrolling like a litany of species that have come seeking riches, technology, or simply a foothold. Each one carries secrets they think are buried deep enough to escape notice. Each one walks into a bureaucracy we've spent decades weaving, threads of law, memory, and vigilance, so tight that any struggle only tightens the knot. I take another sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle, and think of the countless forms yet to be signed, the endless audits yet to be triggered, the quiet triumph of a species that learned long ago that the most effective weapon isn't a fleet or a laser, but the unyielding insistence that truth, once recorded, can never be erased. The next delegation approaches, their footsteps echoing on the polished floor, and I prepare to greet them, not with weapons but with a pen, a file, and the unshakable certainty that history, when weaponized, is the silent, unstoppable trap they will never see coming. We need to continue the story from the first-person perspective of the human negotiator. The previous part ended with the next delegation approaching. We must maintain the tone: bureaucratic, psychological warfare, no space battles. Use first-person, no headings, no markdown, continue seamlessly. Show the trap unfolding through forms, audits, legal clauses. Keep it engaging and long-form but concise. The next delegation is a crystalline species, their bodies faceted geometries that refract the overhead lights into rainbows. They glide rather than walk, leaving faint trails of static electricity that make my hair stand on end. Their ambassador, a towering prism named Kalen, extends a shard of itself toward me in what I've learned is a gesture of greeting. I don't shake it, instead I slide a folder across the table. "Welcome to Earth," I say. "Before we discuss your request for exclusive mining rights in the asteroid belt, I need you to review this preliminary environmental impact assessment. It's required under Section 14, subsection C of the Terran Ecological Protection Accord. Your species has a documented history of altering planetary crusts without regard for indigenous microbial life. The assessment will determine whether your methods comply with our standards." Kalen's facets pulse with a slow amber light. "We have submitted our credentials to the Galactic Registry. Our technology is clean, our intentions are peaceful. Credentials are not compliance," I reply, sliding a second form across the table. "And this is a waiver of sovereign immunity for any ecological damage incurred during your operations. Sign it, and we can proceed to the next stage." Refuse, and I'm afraid your request will be tabled indefinitely, while the Bureau of Interstellar Affairs conducts a full review of your species' environmental record across all 7 systems you've colonized. The crystal's internal light flickers. I know what they're thinking. That review would take decades, during which time their competitors would secure the belt. They have no choice. A thin filament extends from Kalen's core, touching the waiver. The ink burns into the paper with a faint hiss. "You humans have a peculiar way of welcoming guests. Guests don't need waivers," I say, "but you're not a guest, you're a corporation. And corporations, unlike guests, have a history of leaving messes for others to clean up." Mara hands me another file. I open it, revealing a dense thicket of clauses, amendments, and cross-references. "Now about the quotas. Your initial proposal suggests a yield of 3 million metric tons per cycle, but under the reconciliation clause you've just signed, we're entitled to cross-reference your past production figures with your declared reserves. If there's a discrepancy of more than 2%, the entire agreement is void and your assets here are subject to immediate seizure." Kalen's form dims, the rainbows fading to a dull gray. "You have no right to our internal records." "I have every right," I say, tapping the waiver. "You signed it, paragraph 7, line 12. The signatory agrees to full transparency of all operational data relevant to the agreement. That includes your internal records. It's standard language. You should have read it more carefully." The crystal shudders. A low hum emanates from its core, the sound of a species unused to being outmaneuvered, but it doesn't argue. It knows the trap is already sprung. I lean back, the chair creaking under me. "Take your time, we have all the time in the world, and remember, every signature you give us is another thread in the net. By the time you realize you're caught, you'll have wrapped yourself so tightly that escape is impossible." The crystal's light stabilizes at a pale, defeated white. It begins to read the next form. I take another sip of coffee. The bitterness is familiar, comforting. Outside the bay window, the sky is darkening, the first stars appearing. Somewhere out there, thousands of species are watching, waiting to see if humanity will break. They don't understand that we already broke centuries ago, and what emerged from the rubble wasn't a warrior. It was a clerk with a grudge and a filing cabinet full of their darkest secrets. And I have all night. Kalen's silence stretches, heavy and deliberate, as though the alien is calculating the cost of every word it might release. I let the pause linger. Silence is a weapon too, one we humans sharpened long ago in courtrooms and interrogation chambers. Mara shifts beside me, sliding another folder across the table. This one is thicker, bound with red tape. I don't open it yet. I want Kalen to see it, to imagine what labyrinth lies inside. "You humans," it finally says, voice resonating like fractured glass, "you drown in your own rules." I smile faintly. "Rules are rivers, they carry everything downstream. You can fight the current, but eventually you'll be swept along. And if you're clever, you can build dams." Kalen's core flickers, a pulse of irritation. "We came for resources, not lectures. And yet here you are," I reply, "signing documents you don't understand, agreeing to terms that will bind you tighter than any chain. You thought you were negotiating with miners. Instead, you're negotiating with archivists. We don't forget, we don't forgive, and we don't lose." I finally open the red-taped file. Inside are cross-jurisdictional audits, citations from interstellar trade courts, Precedents buried so deep in the annals of bureaucracy that even Kalen's kind would need centuries to unravel them. I slide one page forward, a single clause highlighted in gold ink. This one, I say softly, invalidates your claim to exclusivity. By signing the waiver, you've agreed to share extraction rights with any party that files a counterclaim within the next 36 hours, and I've already filed 6. The crystal's hum rises, sharp and discordant. You would fracture the agreement before it begins. No, I say, leaning closer, lowering my voice to conspiratorial whisper. I would fracture you. Piece by piece, clause by clause, until your empire is nothing but filings in a cabinet, contested claims, and frozen assets. You came here thinking humanity was weak, but weakness taught us patience. Weakness taught us how to weaponize paper, ink, and silence. Kalen dims again, its light almost extinguished. Mara watches, her eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. Outside, the stars multiply, indifferent witnesses to the slow dismantling of an empire. I sip my coffee, savoring the bitterness. Every form signed is another nail in their coffin, hammered not with steel but with bureaucracy. And when the trap finally closes, it won't be with a roar of cannons, it will be with the whisper of a clerk stamping, approved. Kalen's core flares bright crimson, the hum sharp enough to rattle the teacups on the table. Your counterclaims are fraudulent, we will dispatch a retrieval fleet. You have no means to stop us. I don't flinch, I just nod at Mara, who taps a tablet on the table. A hologram springs to life above the surface, not a fleet but a stack of encrypted transmission logs, timestamps stretching back 3 years, all marked with the Kalen Consortium's private encryption keys. You already sent a retrieval fleet, I say, calm as anything. 2 months ago, they never made it out of the Kuiper Belt. You think we didn't notice the quiet pings your ships were sending back to your homeworld, the ones carrying coordinates for the Tunguska site? The ones tied to the 1947 Roswell debris you've been scavenging for decades. Kalen goes completely still, its light dimming to a faint, wavering blue. You cannot prove. We don't have to, I cut in, sliding another document across the table. This one S stamped with the seal of the United Nations Outer Space Affairs Office, but the header is in Kalen's native script, a treaty they signed with a human front company back in 2089, a shell corporation we set up specifically to feed them half-truths about the location of the artifact caches they've been hunting since they first detected our radio broadcasts a century prior. That treaty you signed with Celestial Resources LLC. The one that grants us full legal jurisdiction over any extraterrestrial activity on Earth, and full access to all your transmission records if we suspect you're operating outside the agreed-upon extraction zones. We found the pings. We cross-referenced them with the treaty. Your fleet violated the terms the second it crossed the Mars orbit line. Their cargo is already impounded. Their crew is in a black site in Nevada, being debriefed by people who speak your language better than you do. The crystal's hum drops to a stuttering, panicked warble. You set this up, you baited us. I lean back, sipping my coffee again, the bitter warmth spreading down my throat. Of course we did. You thought we'd be cowering when your ships showed up in orbit. You thought we'd beg for mercy or try to fight you with missiles. But you were the ones who brought the knives to a paperwork fight. You came for the secrets of our past, the dark parts we tried to hide, the parts we thought would get us killed if anyone else found out. You thought you could take them, use them to turn us against each other, to carve up the planet like a carcass. But we didn't hide those secrets to keep them from you. We hid them as bait. Mara slides another folder across the table, this one unmarked, no red tape binding its edges. She opens it, and inside are grainy black and white photos. The 1938 War of the Worlds broadcast panic, the 1947 Roswell wreckage fragments, the 1969 Apollo 11 anomalies NASA scrubbed from the official record, the 2004 Phoenix lights, all marked with Kalen Consortium insignia, all with notes scrawled in their native script detailing extraction plans and bribes paid to corrupt government officials. We've known about you since the first time you sniffed around our radio signals, I say. We've been tracking your scavengers, your spies, your front companies for 70 years. Every secret you dug up, every lie you fed to our governments, every attempt to weaponize our own history against us, we logged it, all of it. Stored in servers buried 3 miles under the Antarctic ice, servers you can't hack, can't bomb, can't touch. And every single one of those logs is admissible in the interstellar trade court we already filed our claims with. You don't just have to share extraction rights. You have to pay reparations for every illegal incursion, every stolen artifact, every time you tried to turn our own past against us. Kalen's light dims so far I can barely make out its edges against the dark wood of the conference table. Its voice is a faint, trembling vibration now, stripped of every ounce of the arrogance it carried when it stepped into the room an hour ago. What do you want? We want you to leave, I say, no hint of compromise in my tone. All of you, no more scavengers, no more spies, no more shell companies buying off our politicians. You turn over every stolen artifact you have in your possession, every piece of data you took from our broadcasts, every record of your incursions into our airspace, and you sign a permanent non-interference treaty, notarized by the Interstellar Court, filed in every jurisdiction from Earth to your homeworld's farthest colony. You don't get the resources. You don't get the secrets. You don't get anything but a receipt that says you paid for the trouble you caused. It is silent for a long minute, the only sound the wind rattling the leaded glass of the window behind me, the same window where a Kalan scout ship hovered for 3 hours last year before we lured it down with a fake transmission about a lost Nazi artifact cache hidden in the building's basement. Mara doesn't move, her hand resting lightly on the panic button under the table, the one that would seal the entire room in lead if Kalan tried anything violent. But it won't. It knows we have it beat. It knows we've been playing this game longer than it's been alive. Fine, Kalan says finally, its voice hollow, no trace of its earlier steel. We will sign. I slide the heavy fountain pen across the table, the barrel engraved with the seal of the United Nations, the same pen used to sign the original Outer Space Treaty in 1967. Good, now initial here, here, and here. And don't even think about trying to forge your signature. We have samples of your handwriting from every message you ever sent to your scavengers on Earth. We'll know. As Kalen's crystalline tendril hovers over the first signature line, I glance at Mara and she nods, a tiny, satisfied smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The trap is closing. No explosions, no laser fire, no grand heroics. Just paper, ink, and 70 years of careful, patient work, turning the dark secrets of our own history into the noose that's about to hang the first alien empire that ever thought it could outsmart humanity. Outside, the stars still burn indifferent, but for the first time in centuries, we're not the ones hiding in the dark, waiting to be found. We're the ones holding the pen, and we're not done writing yet.